city of Atlantis is perhaps one of the most interesting mysteries of our times, and even of ancient times, as it became the subject of interest to historical figures such as Plato himself. The city of Atlantis is much more than a fable. It's a key to understanding human history in our relationship to this beautiful planet. It's pretty incredible to consider that another highly advanced civilization on this planet existed. But even more remarkable is the story of its destruction, a lesson that echoes in time, asserting that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, how advanced humanity becomes as a species, Mother Nature still has a number on us. That humanity, as infallible as we like to assume we are sometimes, is still vulnerable to Earth's ultimate wrath. More than a story of accomplishment, Atlantis is ultimately a story of survival. And as legends have it, there were actually some survivors that arose from this disaster. For many decades, researchers have assumed that Atlantis was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, lying deep in some undiscovered seabed. I mean, isn't that what the legends are saying? That some island state was flooded? Perhaps tainted with some institutional and even historical academic racism, it was too readily assumed that the Atlanteans were white. Fair-skinned people no different than the classical Greek depiction of Poseidon. Remarkably, the deeper I went into the rabbit hole of what Atlantis could be, I found little to no evidence supporting the aforementioned assertion that Atlanteans are white. On the contrary, I found evidence that Atlanteans may have been highly accomplished and civilized black people. One example would be the description outlined in Plato's Critias, describing Poseidon reproducing with people that were earth-born. Now, from a modern perspective, some might find these descriptions somewhat racist. I kind of agree, but I would naturally assume that if the Greeks at the time were not accustomed to seeing Africans, that earth-born would be one way to describe people that had a darker complexion than themselves. Sadly, it seems that these racist undertones actually carried over to modern times and trying to interpret what a highly civilized culture would look like. Now, here's some food for thought. The Dogon people spoke of their early ancestors as coming from an island that sunk. The Egyptians talked about how some of their first pharaohs were descendants of Atlantis. Now, if you didn't know, the first pharaohs of Egypt were actually more related to Nubians, who were black, as was the Dogon people. Given the Greek description and the descendant claims that are coming out of West Africa and Egypt, it seems that all the evidence points to Atlanteans as being black, which comes to my next point. In 2018, a YouTuber named Bright Insight made a startling assertion that got the entire community in a frenzy. He proposed that perhaps some of our most basic assumptions regarding Atlantis were actually incorrect. Sounds familiar? Well, he wondered if it was possible that Atlantis was once flooded, but not actually fully sunk, meaning via thousands of years and possible volcanic activity, that this so-called sunken island state was actually on land. And then he showed us the Google Earth image that basically shocked the entire internet community, including myself, of this formation in the Sahara deserts in the country of Mauritania. Wow. To those who are accustomed to hearing the description of Atlantis, it was kind of like a lightning bolt being struck from Zeus himself. This looks exactly like the circle description that at one time seemed to be so strangely unique in a historical context type way. But it wasn't just the looks. The fact that it has a south-facing passage entrance, also described by Plato, or the fact that it's surrounded by mountains that had water springs, just like Plato's description, or the fact that this area just happens to produce both saltwater and freshwater springs, also noted. It wasn't just all of that, it was also the measurement of it. This 2004 paper from investigator L. Eddy describes the circle, the principal city, as being estimated to be around 24 kilometers wide. Now take a look at this Google Earth measurement. But you see, the coincidences didn't stop there. The first king of Mauritania was said to have been called Atlas, I kid you not, which is the same name as the first ruler of Atlantis. The general area seems to be historically associated with Atlantis, which includes the mountains north of the area, which happen to be called the Atlas Mountains, as was noted on a map by Herodotus in 400 BC. You can see how this whole West African area is denoted with the label of Atlantis. Now, one thing that this channel discovered as we pressed deeper into the subject, which was later reiterated, which was just published a few days ago, is that the famed metal orichalcum, a metal that was said to have been invented by the Atlanteans, was, well, it was universally described as being a combination of copper and gold, some kind of alloy. It just happens that one of Mauritania's largest export is the metals copper and gold. Seems extraordinary, but how could Atlantis have risen and why was it destroyed? Now, these questions are a bit more speculative, but it does make a lot of sense when geologists describe these circle rings as having been created by a periodic rising and sinking due to a unique volcanic process still poorly understood. The important thing to note is not the geological science itself, but the mere fact that this area was said to periodically rise and sink. Most interesting to me was the description of this sinking. Because have you ever seen what happens when a volcanic region sinks? Well, it kind of looks like this. So is there more evidence that this area may have at one point been underwater? Oh yeah. For starters, let's consider that one of the most common trades in the area is salt. Yes, you heard me right, salt, which could have only accumulated in this area had it been underwater. And there seems to be clear evidence of outflows that happened at one point, as can be seen from space. There are whale bones discovered in the area, some of species that are still present off the Atlantic coast, and more importantly, that looks to not be fossilized. Now, since fossilization takes around 10,000 to 16,000 years to occur, this implies that the bones were present before then. So there are whales, seashells, salt deposits, volcanic activity, and obvious water markings on the terrain, some which can actually be seen from space. So what is missing? Well, we need to wipe out one more assumption, which is that some researchers believe that this area has been desert for much longer than 10,000 years. Some would put it tens of millions of years. Well, that is until recently. New studies are now indicating that the Sahara Desert was actually lush and verdant around, yep, you guessed it, 10,000 years ago. This is also supported by the many cattle bones that have been discovered in areas previously thought to not have cattle. And while we're on the topic of animals, I should also mention that Atlantis was said to have elephants and bulls. Now that's a kind of a strange combination for what was supposed to be an island. However, it's not so strange when you realize that elephants used to be endemic to the country of Mauritania, in fact as early as 1989, and that some of the local petroglyphs in the area depict bulls and cattle, which is obviously incongruent to the previous assumption that this area has been desert for millions of years. But ladies and gentlemen, there is more. So much more. Coincidences, new discoveries, and a new mystery to be uncovered. This new mystery is really, it's making me scratch my head as it seems to go against historical documentation as to what was really going on in this area. So to make these points as clear as possible, I will be diving into Google Earth to better highlight this new mystery as well as some new discoveries. You don't want to miss this one, so strap on and let's take a look from a space perspective. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me in this amazing journey. Last time, when we did an episode on Atlantis, there was some interesting findings that we discovered. So today, I wanted to go ahead and show you what I uncovered in the general area. So if this is the Richat Structure, where we think the city center of Atlantis was, well, zooming out, this would be the general region, at least the outcropping that is being raised in some of the surrounding mountains. And so I'm going to start off a little bit outside of the Richat Structure and show you some really interesting things. Now, one of the interesting descriptions that was given by Plato is that Atlantis is made out of red and black blocks. Can we actually confirm this? This is really interesting. Look at this. So I'm going to start off by going to the Attar Hills. This is a city with only about 25,000 people in the area. I would say it's actually one of the bigger towns in the area. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. red and black rocks, just as was described by Plato. And dare I say, even though this is very close to the town center, this is very strange. Look, I'm not a geologist. I'm sure there might be some kind of geological explanation for these very rectilinear looking blocks. But just wanted to show you the stones, the red and black stones that Plato so famously described regarding Atlantis. Here is another example. Look at this. I mean, am I crazy, or does this just look too perfect to be natural? It almost looks like there's like a little hot tub here, some blocks being built in this perfectly square condition. And what surprises me is this is right next to the town center, and there seems to be no discussions of this. Now, what's interesting is other ruins have been discovered in this area, but nobody seems to be interpreting this as strange. I think it's strange. I'm not a geologist, but I think it looks unusually rectilinear for a geological process. Anyways, if this doesn't convince you that something strange is going on, let's look at what I call the straight channel. This is really strange. Take a look at this. There is this outcropping of rocks, which clearly seems to be a channel of some sort. And look, if this was just a naturally eroded channel, that's fine, but I just would not expect that it would be this linear. Look how straight that is. And not just linear. If we take the ruler, and this thing is like what? What does it say here? 17.5 kilometers. Now, since we used kilometers last time, I'll keep this as the main metric just so that I don't get people confused with these numbers. But 17-kilometer long outcropping that is almost perfectly straight, that seems to have had water in it. Now, why do I say there was water in here? Well, if you zoom in, look at all the vegetation inside the channel. Look at that. So this vegetation, to me, seems to be indicative that there's some kind of water supply underneath here. Now, why is this still running like that? I don't know. But look, you can see all the vegetation in there. And the sand bottom is so different than the rock outcropping on top that it does seem like at some point this was carved by water. And once again, look how straight that is. Just very strange. Now let's show you some things that might look like building foundations. Now, this is going to be like the first example where I'm not a geologist. I can't tell you that these are just unusually rectilinear type features. Look at this. Look at these rocks. They're just splattered around. To me, it's so strange that you have this little mound and you have all these straight looking rocks. I don't know, like geologically, if the fracturing of the bedrock is the reason why these things look rectilinear, well, where's the bedrock with this one? I don't see some sheet of rock that's being fractured naturally. I just see a whole bunch of thrown around stones, some of them that look perfectly square. Look at the shadow of this. Look at that. I mean, that is like perfect, right? And then if you just kind of whip around, you'll see this weird circular formation with rocks. Was it a previous building? I don't know. To me, it just looks very unusual. And of course, there is these stones, which once again, maybe it's geology, but Jesus, I don't know, man. It kind of creates like a circular formation. It's very, very cleanly cut, the stones. So now that we showcased some interesting features, some things that could or could not be geological, I'm going to have to get some experts to weigh in. I wanted to now go inside the Richat structure and show you the evidence that this was actually underwater. So first thing is when you go over here, you see the salt deposits. Just to kind of zoom out so you can see the perspective of the eye of the Sahara.
zooming in, you see these salt deposits, which means that at some point this was underwater, ocean water, not just fresh water. And look at this. What does this look like to you? In my opinion, this looks like ripples, as if the ground formed ripples at some point from the water running through, just like you see in a beach. So to me, this was like direct evidence that there was water. But something that I was mentioning regarding a mystery right before we entered with Google Earth, it was this. See, Bright Insight discovered this little strange square. At first, he wasn't really sure what it was. And by random chance, I actually uncovered a second one, which is all the way over here. You can see they're almost identical in their formation. And if you zoom out, you can kind of see that that one's in the outer end. The other one's a little bit closer to the center. By research, I just happened to discover that these are actually forts. Not just any fort, they are supposedly an Ottoman fort. Now, the reason why this is so mysterious is twofold. One of them, the Ottoman, according to all records, all historical records that I've looked at, yeah, they conquered North Africa, but I didn't see any records of them going as far west as Mauritania itself. I would assume that these were built around what is called the Battle of Three Kings, when the King Sebastian tried to join in to fight off the Islamic forces. But like I said, I see no record that the Ottoman Empire had ever reached as far west as Mauritania. And to add to that, why would you need to build two forts inside a structure that for the most part is kind of uninhabitable? There's nothing there. There's no running water. So what in the world is the Ottoman Empire, the same empire that drew that Pyrrhus race map that apparently shows Antarctica without its ice? Apparently that map was sourced from an Ottoman admiral. So that same empire that seemed to have known that Antarctica had no ice was building forts inside what we now think to be the center of Atlantis. Is this not strange? I think at the very least, this is very interesting archaeological discoveries that seems to indicate that whatever our history is telling us regarding the Ottoman Empire, it's not completely filled. So going further with this, look what I discovered. What the hell is this? What I can say is that is certainly not natural. The circle is obviously too perfect. It seems to be present in some weird looking canal type structure. What is that? Inside the Richat Structure. Is it a ceremonial burial ground? Is this something from the time of the Ottoman Empire, or is this something that's much older? I think these are really important questions that if somebody knows more, I would love to hear more information about what this thing could possibly be. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that that's not natural. Now, whether it's 10,000 years old, that's a whole different question. That's something that we need further investigation to figure out what this could possibly be. And I want to show you something that looks to be too much like foundations. Look at this. Like I said, I'm not a geology expert, but certainly when you look at this, I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that this is probably not natural. That this looks not only to be a foundation of some sort, but one that is likely very, very old because of how eroded it is. If you just scoot to the right, you can see more versions of it. Look how perfect this little square is here. Look at this. So if somebody says there's absolutely no evidence that there is any kind of structure or building in Richat Structure, well, show them this. Maybe the previous rocks that I showed you was some kind of geological process. This is not the same thing, ladies and gentlemen. This is very indicative of what you think of when you see very old building foundations. And it has to do with the hollow structure, the kind of way that all the lines connect, that makes me think that there is something more to this than just geology. Here is another example of something that is giving me some questions. So, whereas here, you see something that looks like a circle, as we start going to the right side, it's like you see this perfect little square patches of rocks. You see little rocks here, see another one over here. So you go here, nothing. Here, yes, little patches of rocks, little patches of rocks, little patches of rocks. Nothing here, but then here you have this little patch of rocks. Does this look geological to you? Maybe I don't know my geology, but there's something that seems very artificial by the way that these rocks are outcropping, as if there's some kind of squared off pattern to this. You see that? Look at that. Now you have to remember that this area was massively flooded because according to the legends, this empire was underwater for quite some time. And it wasn't that deep, like it fell 1,000 feet into the ocean type stories. I mean, the actual legends talk about how the surrounding oceans became so mixed with the sediment itself that the waters became a type of mud that was unable to be sailed, that people couldn't take ships in because it was just too thick. And so that's the type of environment that this thing was under at a certain point. And it just makes me wonder if this is something more than just geological processes. And some more recent structures that I thought was kind of strange that I want to show you. There is this square that I have no idea what that's doing there or what that's for. It does look like it's a little bit more modern than the Ottoman structure. It seems to be more defined, and it's about half the size of the Ottoman fort. Maybe it's used to hold camels. I have no idea. If somebody knows, let me know in the comment section. This is just outside of the Richat structure, right in this end right here. And then we also found very, very modern recent settlements dab in the middle of the Richat structure. Look at this. In fact, you can even see tire tracks over here. So the question is, what are these people doing there? This is dab in the middle of the Richat structure. There's no water there. There's no resources. It takes 15 to 20 kilometers from the center just to get out of the circle. It's not a place that you just go to hang out with your friends. I brought this up in a previous episode, and at first I thought it might be a scientific archaeology station, and I'm starting to wonder if these are vendors, local people who are selling local artifacts that they are discovering in the area. So I don't know. I just thought it's strange that they have tire tracks, this weird little structure dab in the middle of the Richat structure. And then I'll call this the most ghetto heliopad I've ever seen. Look at this. What? They actually built a heliopad. I mean, when you built heliopads, they're supposed to actually be cemented. This is just literally on the dirt, right next to the road, so they didn't even give enough space for the heliopad. But I will admit, it's about 60 feet, which is actually the size of a heliopad, so that's probably what this is. Now, what it's doing there, right outside a town that only has 25,000 people, in a very, very one of the poorest countries in all of Africa, I have no idea what that heliopad is all about. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Some interesting mysteries to dissect. Why was the Ottoman Empire there in the middle of the Richat structure? Why were they building forts there? What are those rocks? What are those foundations? Please leave your thoughts and comments below. I think this topic is just absolutely fascinating, and I think there's so many things to look at and consider. And I'd suggest, why not look at the area yourself? You know, let me know if you find anything, if there's anything you want to share. Maybe if there's enough people that find original things around this area, maybe we can do a little episode with all the findings of the viewers. So I hope you liked this episode. I'll keep trying to find out more information about what's happening with Atlantis and the Richat structure. Of course, I wanted to throw out a thank you for Jimmy at Bright Insight, who he wasn't the first person to come out with this idea, but he was one of the first YouTubers to put this idea forward. So I just wanted to give him a thank you. And I wanted to thank the Patreon members and, of course, the viewers for sticking around at least this long. If you're hearing this thank you, then it means you stuck around through the whole episode. So that's something to be thankful for. Anyways, I'll catch you ladies and gentlemen next time. This is Felipe speaking, signing out.